Doug Nichols, what are your thoughts on the gun culture of America? Why do Americans hang on to the Second Amendment to justify mass shootings and the entitlement of gun ownership? What can your great country do to go in another direction? It was a pretty different question, but I thought it would be good to talk about something new and different here. We tend to comment on this sort of thing on my podcast more often. I think that the United States was founded on a rebellion, right, against England. I think that the United States has always had a tradition of strong, fierce independence, personal freedom, personal independence, and it's kind of the whole culture of America, and has been for the last couple centuries, like I said, since it was founded. So since you have this strong personal idealism and independent thought, there's a lot of, it's very easy to create a very anti-government sentiment, which doesn't seem to exist in other countries. Now, I haven't lived in other countries. My experience of other countries, Europe or Canada or Mexico or any other country in the world, are based on secondhand experience from what I've been told by people who are from those places. But I get that they're very different. That they consider they're not as necessarily distrusting of their government, or there's more of a cooperative effort in some places, right? And there's a lot of propaganda that comes into the United States about that, right? Especially about Sweden and Norway and Scandinavian countries and the socialisms and how great they are and that sort of thing, right? Higher taxes, but you get all these benefits and all this sort of thing. And we could talk about that kind of stuff all day long, but Americans have an almost inbred distrust of authority, right? When it comes to governments, at least, they do, right? And so there's always this idea, this play back and forth between the government services and what the government does for you versus what the government's doing to you. And people, rightly or wrongly, perceive that guns and personal gun ownership are their only personal defense against that. I don't happen to follow that line of reasoning. I think that the democratic process and civil discourse and laws and things like that are certainly a wall of a line of defense for us. And I think and wish that more people would engage in that part of the process more, despite all of its, definitely despite all of its noted shortcomings and difficulties and the slowness of the process and that sort of thing. And of course, then we have the Second Amendment, which pretty clearly states that, and is easy to interpret as saying that, because we don't totally trust the government, because we had to rebel in order to have the United States at all, we're always going to be in this state of readiness against the government and have the state militia sort of thing, right? And I think some people get a little bit creative and exaggerated in their interpretations of that when they're carrying guns around in Walmart or Subway. I think we've gone, a little bit nutso with that. I don't think it has any place. I don't think walking around with guns is any kind of a solution to a civilized society. So I think in terms of, what would it take to turn the ship and move in a different direction, I think it would take a whole lot of propaganda. I think it would take a whole lot of work on the, what did it take to make cigarettes, go from a hip, cool, good thing to be doing, which it was in the 1940s and 50s, to what it is now, where it's a bad thing, and people are, mainly, look at smokers in disgust, right, for the most part. And recognize that smoking is dangerous, like it's actually really not good for you. And 50 years ago, people really didn't think that. Well, we've got 300 years to overcome of, gun rights in the United States, and there are sensible reasons to have guns. So it's not that I think everybody who, is a Second Amendment advocate or supports guns is a gun nut or something, because there are logical, sensible reasons for gun ownership. But I think and wish that the people who were so pro Second Amendment could see the other side of the reasoning too, and kind of give some ground on it, because it gets so extremist. In certain circles, it gets so extremist that logic has just taken a back seat to emotional feelings. So I think it was going to take a long-term propaganda, PR campaign of some kind to raise our children. And, I think it's going to take a generation or two or three to raise our children with the idea that guns aren't necessary for personal freedom, that the government is not necessarily something that is inherently bad or twisted or corrupted or evil, even though there's lots and lots and lots, again, of good reasons to see where there is corruption and there is evil and there is, people taking advantage of the system. We live in the world we live in, and if we don't like it, we need to do something to change it. So I think that's what people need to do, and I think that's what it's going to take to change the idea of how important personal gun ownership is in the United States, because we're pretty fanatical about it. No question about it. There's fanaticism on this subject, and that fanaticism needs to be dealt with through education of generations. It's a multi-generational education. So that's what I think.